Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Your host is Debra, CEO of Rue Global Impact and co-founder and chairwoman of Billion Strong, an identity and empowerment organization designed to bring billions of voices of persons with disabilities together. To join the global community and to donate to the cause, visit billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org. And now, on to the episode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Debra Rue, and this is Human Potential at Work. And I'm really excited about my guest today. His name is Dave Dame, and he is the Director of Accessibility for Microsoft. He actually is in Canada, in Waterloo, Ontario. Right, Dave? And and he has a very interesting story. And there's so many reasons why I wanted to talk to Dave, but part of the reason why I want to talk to him is because Dave is a very well thought of technologist. Oh, yeah, he also happens to have been born with cerebral palsy, but he is a technologist. He worked, and I'll let him give us a little bit of his background. But for example, he ran the agile practice for Scotiabank. And a lot of us in the industry might know that Scotiabank really has been working very hard on their accessibility efforts and disability inclusion. But at the same time, I love that Dave worked with the agile practice, not necessarily doing things with disability inclusion. So we talked about some of that off air as well, and we'll get into some of those points. But before we begin, let me just do a quick visual description. I am a older white woman with gray and purple hair and a green and purple and black top and black glasses and blue little bracelet or necklace to keep them on my face. So Dave, welcome to the program. I love your background.
Thank you. And my name is Dave. I'm a 50-year-old male with brown hair, red t-shirt, and glasses. And I wish I looked a lot better than I did.
I think you're very handsome.
I'll come on your show.
You have such a very impressive background, and I want to dig into what you're doing at Microsoft, definitely, but I also want to talk about your experience, your lived experience with cerebral palsy and being a technologist. And so how did you first get into technology?
Well, it's interesting. I was born in 1971 in a small blue town. And at the time, the doctor told my parents, Dave may not live past 12. Dave may never be able to speak clearly, if at all. And even if he does, don't expect much, because there's not much that someone like Dave can do with cerebral palsy. Luckily, my parents didn't know what to do, but they knew they didn't want anything that was gonna really impact the rest of my life. So they decided to deal with the unknown, ambiguity, and the complex to go, how do we raise a child with cerebral palsy? Because there's really, there's no playbook on to be a parent, and there's definitely no playbook to be a parent with a child with disability. But I feel lucky. I was born in a generation before rights and everything existed for disability equality and rights. So I got to live when there was no rights, but I got to live as it was starting to come to play. And what was better was, if I would have been born in any earlier time, I wouldn't have been able to embrace technology as it was starting to get introduced. And really, I think we've always said it, a disability isn't what holds somebody back, rather, it's the mismatch in the environment that would hold someone back. And technology was always that enabler, that enablement playing field that let me go into the classroom. I was able to type and use spreadsheets. But because computers were so new, I had to learn it at such an advanced level at 13 years old. I was already ahead of the game. So when people were just trying to use it, I was using it how people use it today, 35 years later. So to me, technology was going to be the vehicle that was going to go. And so I remember when I graduated high school, I didn't know if I wanted to go to university for business because I had really good business grades, or technology because I loved creating a world that was meant for me. And I was sitting there struggling, and my dad walked down our stairs and said, David, let's be honest. with you being in a wheelchair, you're not going to be a fireman, police officer, or a construction worker. But you know what else you're not going to be? Living under my roof for free the rest of your life. Figured out. So I went to school for computer science, got really good grades, but then I also went to school to get business. So I started out in engineering, building, coding, but I found out I was more interested in the why are we building it? Should we build it? Because in technology, you can build anything. The real question is, should we build it? So that led me into product where I started leading enterprise product to market because I was a way better product person than an engineer. And then when Agile came around, I thought, great, now I don't have to wait 3 years to deliver a software product. I can do it iteratively, apply the learning as I go, so that way I can meet where the customer's going instead of where I thought they would be at the start of the project. So Agile lets you steer to an outcome versus shoot once and hope you hit the target. And because it was always natural to me, because that's how I had to live my life being with cerebral palsy, I had to deal with unknown and complexity. I had to learn by doing, and I had to learn to go where the outcomes would take me by just taking in the learning, trying something different and new. So I became a great change agent for my life that helped me lead a lot of number of organizations. So 2 years ago, I hit 50. I was working at Scotia. And it's funny, that's where it got me the hint to start working in accessibility. I don't know if you know her,
I
but
do.
Monica, she fabulous, fabulous lady, and I give her the fullest credit for getting me into accessibility. Because she was like, Dave, I hear you talk about agile innovation technology. I never hear you talk about accessibility. I'm like, nope, that would be a little too convenient, wouldn't it? The person in a wheel about it. And in Monica's very subtle way, she goes, that's too bad because it could help so many people like you. And I'm like, it's one thing that sits on you, right? You hear it, you go home, you think about it. So when I turned 50, I broke the glass ceiling. I was the first visible disability executive at a major bank. And I'm like, now what? I'm not even supposed to be still alive. And you really start pondering what you want to do. So up until that point, I was always asking myself, what do I want to be when I grow up? When you hit 50, you start thinking about how do I want to leave the world when I'm no longer here? So one of the offers came up from Microsoft because I did a leadership talk with them before the pandemic, and they're like, "Oh, you got to come in." And in Canada, they're mostly in sales agents. I'm like, I'm not great in sales. But then this role came up to lead their accessibility portfolio, and even still, I'm like, am I fitting a cliche by doing this? Because everybody unfortunately assumes if you're a professional with a disability, then you must have disability. So that was a really hard mental chasm for me to cross. And I talked to Janison from LinkedIn. I'm like, how do you, and he's like, look, he goes, yes, you have a disability, but it's the skills and your experiences that got you here that's going to make you valuable for the job. And if it wasn't for Janison, then who knows, right? And so I met, and when you meet a leader, you'll be like, wow, this
Yeah.
person gets it. Because at first I thought I would go through the interview, see what I do, but I met her and she so totally got it. And there's a lot of leaders that will talk inclusion, preach diversity, and it makes them
What?
feel good, right? I'm going to talk about it. But what I really admire about Chris is she actually fundamentally is in her heart and soul, and she's had to learn where Microsoft has to learn about onboarding somebody that's going to work remote and figuring out how to make sure that they can be included in this hybrid world. And the effort, like all leaders are busy. I manage large teams of people up to a couple hundred. And we always go, we'll get someone else to do it, but she actually took it and owned it and truly made me feel that I belonged there, which gives me the confidence to push the barrier I need to do, right? Because, everybody agrees with
Right.
accessibility, but not everybody invests in it. And that was my first lesson in my first year, because I'm used to, if you don't like when I'm proposing technology or agile, you'll challenge it right away. But nobody's going to put their hand up and go, I don't agree with accessibility out loud, right? So they're going to go, yes. But you also need to make sure the follow through of investment. So gotta, make sure you walk alongside of it all the way to the
Yeah,
finish line.
when you mentioned Jennison, it just made me laugh because I had this exact same conversation with Jennison before he moved into the accessibility field. He was not in yet, but he was so bright. And we were at an IEEE conference and we were just standing in the corridor. And he's like, Deborah, I'm not going to do it. It's ridiculous. I'm blind. And so I have to be in accessibility. That's ridiculous. And we had the same conversation. And I'm like, but Jennison, you're so smart with technology. It's not because you're blind that we want you in here. Yay, that's a wonderful perk for us. But it's just so funny. And then you had that same conversation with him because the reality is you're right. And how wonderful that even, oh, yeah, they figure when they see me in a wheelchair, I must be in accessibility. Thank God they think that instead of what's he doing here, right? That's right.
Exactly, right? So at least they know they're not for me, not like,
Yeah, sad. But I also wanted to explore, I want to talk about Microsoft products. And the reason why, because going back a few years, I created a company in 2000 called Tech Access. And over 90% of my team were technologists that had trained themselves pretty much because things weren't accessible to make websites fully accessible. But everyone on my team back in 2000 teleworked, 2000 to 2011. And the only reason why we could create Tech Access was because of Microsoft. What? Okay, what I mean by that is Microsoft had already built the accessible operating systems right in at 3.1, operating system 3.1. Already Microsoft was thinking about.
I remember
I know.
3-1. Where did they live, right?
I
Exactly.
know. And so it was like, but we couldn't have teleworked if Microsoft had not built that into the technology, because the technology we used Microsoft, we used Microsoft Project, we used Microsoft Office, we used, so it was, I have to give credit to Microsoft because they are the reason why I could even create a company like Tech Access. And so
If it wasn't for Microsoft, I would be. I used the earliest version of Word,
I
Excel,
remember.
PowerPoint, right? And back when there were separate programs before there were, but they were the key enabler for me to get the skills I needed to have the career I needed to have the life I did. So when I was thinking of making the career change, do I check? Do I go to any of the other tech companies? And I sort of coming home to rebirth the next generation of people, involve them, right? And what I like about Microsoft is every organization wants diversity and inclusion. Great, great purpose to go. But we're really trying to create the technology platform to allow the hiring and the diverse workforce to come in and be productive right
Right.
away. So it's great that they got the vision. We want to help support that vision for a variety of reasons. We know the power of cognitive diversity because in Agile, we bring cross functional technologists together to build great things. But what makes Agile even better is if you get people from diverse backgrounds with cross functional things to be able to see things that only one or two people will miss, right? The more eyes, the different perspectives, the better holistic view you have on what it is you need to build, the better resilience it is, the better learning it is, and the better humanity it is, right? Like,
Technology should work for humans, just saying. Just seems like it.
and to me, it's not about technology, it's humanity, and technology is the gateway to allow that cognitive diversity and humanity to come. So if you look at, like you said, up until Windows 3.1, there was Windows 95, there's Windows
98,
98, and then Vista. Well, Vista, but but they always carried the same
98 was
accessibility
great.
thread all the way.
98 was great. I love 90.
XP was
Okay,
the
okay,
bomb.
okay, I agree.
And
I agree. You're right.
but then if you just look at the software, that's one layer and element of it. But when you start looking at the devices, right, the way you got to act with it. So how do we make all these different form factors accessible? And when we can only customize it so much, how can we complement it with accessories that allow tailoring just more finer to be able to meet people where the accessible hardware stops and the needs still extend? How do we create accessories in a wider ecosystem to meet people where they're at, to get them as productive and creative as they can be? We always say productive, but I like to
Oh,
say
no, I agree.
creative
I
too.
so agree with you. And I think that also is where really seasoned technologists like you and Jennison, just using those examples again. I think that where we are in accessibility now, and I don't think this, I know this, now we have to rethink the way we're doing it because what we have done as an industry is we've told accidentally often accessibility is almost like a secondary thought to do. Instead of it being in everything that we do, all you have to do is put an overlay and you're done, Dave. You got it.
Yeah, well, what was my biggest mistake as a product manager and product designer? I always assume wrongfully that a user will maintain their same ability through their whole lifespan. But we know we're all going to be
Yep.
disabled someday. Just some of us beat you to it. So in building accessibility, I don't call it accessibility. I call it
Yes.
relevance. If we want to stay relevant to our users, why not create it with the flexibility to be able to cater to them as their needs change so they can keep their same creativity and productivity they had? So employers can keep their employees longer, maximize it, don't have to redo that. It is a way of fulfilling the circle of life to have people be the best they can be, with technology being that level setter of the environment mismatch that just continues to allow us to live.
I'm just going to tell you that we are going to cut that statement out and broadcast that all over the world because, yes, that is exactly what we need to do. But to do that, Dave, we have to have the geniuses like you and the genius that might also have disabilities because I just think is this we're not thinking about it in the right way. So I love interviewing technologists and leaders like you that get all these moving parts. Now we're doing the metaverse and the internet 3 and the twin cities or digital twins whatever, but if you are not involved in the conversations, I worry about that. I just feel like someone like you with all of your years of experiences and your years of experiences of trying to figure out how you navigate a society that is not accessible to you, both digitally and physically. Think of the what you've learned. Of course, it's going to be innovation and creative, but also what you just said about we change. We change as we live our lives.
And I think we've done a good I think we've taken the first step in compliance,
Yes.
right? Everybody knows compliance. And what I enjoy you guys in the States is if you're not compliant, we'll sue. Right in Canada, we'll just write a nasty email and that's about it. But compliance is table stakes. Yes, we got to do that. It's important. But nobody's gonna go, what a beautifully compliant product you got, right? Nobody's gonna give you for that. So instead of stopping short of building products that somebody can use, why not go further, innovate, and build products that they will choose? There's a difference between if I can use it versus I would choose it. And we got to change that mindset to not, and even as technology providers, we can't short of, well, this is just better than the rest of assistive technology. And I'm like, art, it's not any worse. That's
I
not
agree.
enough. How do we get the same usability, that elegance, that intuitiveness that we would give every user? And my mission, my passion, because this will likely be my last job, is to ensure future people with disabilities have a quality and user experience that we don't sell short of just making it possible. We make it delightful.
Oh, I love how you think. You definitely have to come back on the show. Dave, what would it have been like for you if you saw a global leader at Microsoft leading a major team, or at Scotiabank leading an agile practice of hundreds of people, and they had cerebral palsy?
It's interesting because I asked my team members that because at least at Microsoft, what I like about Microsoft is it's the first time I've seen other people like me in senior positions, right? So the first I met Jessica Refuse. I don't know if you
I do, and I've interviewed her, and I love her.
fabulous, right? And look at us just name dropping like
Yeah.
crazy. But the first time I met Jessica, I could have a conversation with her that I can't with any of us, right? And it was just so delightful to connect with. She's a mother, a professional, a wife,
A lawyer. She's a
my
lawyer, I think.
goodness, and a lawyer. Like, what else? Like, and it was just great to see because until then, I'd see more at Scotia, and that's thankfulness to Monica for building her team out. But I worked adjacent with Monica. We weren't on the same team at all, but she turned me into a champion, and I began trying to support her in all her initiatives. But before then, the only time I seen people with disabilities were either or accessibility groups. I never seen other people like me. So I asked my employees, I'm like, what's it like reporting to a is there an ego thing? Is there kind of an agenda? They're honest. They said first they don't know how to approach it because they haven't always been exposed to somebody with a disability that was subject matter expert, leader, and all that. And they taught me a lot too because when I used to try to, I use a power wheelchair, but when I used to try to mask my disability, even though I had a power wheelchair, of trying not to acknowledge sometimes days should suck and that struggle and the
Yep.
efforts, but I would try to really cover that up. But I remember one of my team members, I haven't followed you over 3 companies because you don't struggle with things. You've admired me because I've seen you struggle and continue to persevere over those things. And that made it human for me. And, people where I had the privilege to serve, they've gotten to see that leadership isn't a rite of passage. It isn't because I know all the answers, not because it's easy, but it's struggling, it's grinding, it's working through others, it's getting that collaborative, collective think that despite all of our weaknesses together, we're a multiplier of so much more that brings people there. And I've been fortunate where I always have super low turnover. And I've had actually people follow me from company to
That's a
company,
good
which isn't always an easy thing. And I feel blessed, right, to be able to touch people, to interact with them, to grow them, to be able to see them achieve things that they could not see for themselves. And that's what leadership is. It's not about being the expert. It's creating an environment where people can become experts.
Yeah, definitely. You have to come back on the show. Yeah, I love the way you think. I love the way you think. I want to make a comment that, but only because as you talk with your hands, I thought of a story. And Lamondre Pugh, Dr. Lamondre Pugh is the CEO of Billion Strong. I'm going to talk to you about that later, and he was born with muscular dystrophy, and it impacts it impacts a lot of things, but it impacts his hands, and he cannot shake your hand in the typical manner. Now, I might have to ask, why the heck are we shaking hands after COVID anyway? But okay, that's a whole nother.
That's another thing.
What? But anyway, so one time he met an executive leader at a former large technology company, and I'm not going to say who, and you'll see why, that he worked with. And the leader was meeting different people, and he met Lamondre, and Lamondre said, "Hey, nice to meet you." And he said, "Just give me a little bump." And Lamondre happens to be African American, so that's something, fist bump in the States, blah, blah, blah. So he said, just,
Oh yeah, we get that.
yeah, just a little.
We're here.
What this executive said to Lamondre's vice president a couple weeks later was, "Yeah, I don't like that Lamondre. He's like an angry cripple." And Lamondre's boss was, "What?" Because Lamondre's a very pleasant individual. So he was like, and he said, "He wouldn't even shake my hand." And the man was like, "Oh my God, really? He can't shake your hand. What is wrong with you?" So sorry, I was just thinking about.
No, but it's funny because I never knew before Microsoft, I never self-disclosed at any time because luckily, after my second and third job, I was building a name for myself as a change agent, so I didn't even have to update my resume a lot of cases.
Yay.
They bring me in, and I remember when I joined the company, they're like, it was about a year and a half. They go, "Oh, you didn't self-identify?" I'm like, "No." "Well, how would we know you're in a wheelchair?" I'm like, "If you haven't noticed in a year and a half, I can't help you." But then, well, that would have made it easier for interviews so we could prepare managers so they know how to interview you. And I'm like, fair. But I said, what if that manager's an idiot? What kind of checkbox do they do that help me prepare on how to deal with, right? Like that was my thought because that used to be my sniff test of when I first met them, how would they feel when they first saw me, right? Because hiring personal support workers, you learn to read people because you got to trust these people with your life. So I'm able to read people incredibly well. And so that's what I would do is a sniff test. And I remember when they said that, I went to the boss of the digital officer. I went, "Did you know I was in a wheelchair at all before you interviewed me?" He goes, "I didn't know before I interviewed you. I heard that you were like I Googled searching your world renowned agile." But he goes, "When I came in the room and saw you in a wheelchair," he's like, "I had a pretty good idea." And funny thing he said was what made him uncomfortable was most people, I guess, when they come in the interview, they'll stand up and shake the person hand. He said, "I didn't know what to do." And he said, "But the minute, 3 minutes into when you started talking, he's like, I forgot you had a disability." And I'm like, oh, and now at Microsoft, and thankfully to a lot of work Jenny's been doing, right? That disability is a strength. I remember reading her blog post way before I met her. And for so many years, I would try to think of it as a limiting thing instead of in self-reflection. Maybe you only get self-reflection when you get old, which is a waste. Too bad you didn't get it early on. But I started realizing part of my identity, part of my strengths, part of my differentiating qualities of being a good changing and product technology person was because I had cerebral palsy. It wasn't limited because, and when I read that blog post from Jenny, I forget it was years ago before I even met her. And that's why when I got to meet her, when I joined Microsoft, I let her know that blog post completely changed my life. You know, we all do a lot of social media posts and we never really know how we influence people all the time. And I just wanted her. That really made me from someone that used to feel they had to apologize for it to somebody that feels safe to now be publicly disclosure of this disability. And I even changed my LinkedIn profile to put it with the wheelchair right there to say, you know, here I am.
Proud.
I'm Dave. Yes, I have cerebral palsy, but it doesn't have me.
Dave,
I,
well,
yeah,
sorry, there was just, and we can take that out. Sorry. So I've kept you over 30 minutes, darn it. But I do have one more question that we talked.
sure thing.
Yeah, we talked about it before we got on air, and it's something that is so important to us at Billion Strong. I know that you said, obviously, you live in Canada. And when you were being courted by Microsoft, they asked you to move to Seattle, to the States, which is the best country. Oh, sorry, just kidding. And then we had a little conversation about that. And I was just wondering if you, because this is something that corporate or employers also really just don't know how to deal with. The caregiving, the support issues that we get, unfortunately, in many countries. I know here in the States, if you get services to help you live your life, if you make more than a little bit of money, those services get taken away from you. And it's just ridiculous. Yeah.
And Canada's got a little bit of that. And it's funny, Deborah, that wasn't the first offer I ever had in the States. Before I joined Scotia, Fitbit reached out
Oh, fun.
and they go, "We'd love you to be the director of Agile." And I'm like, how cool would that be? A product that really counts people's footsteps, that somebody in a wheelchair, those jokes write themselves. Like, regardless of what the offer was, you had me. And to be in California and not see snow, like, I love Canada, but I hate snow. Which, and then same thing with Microsoft. And what people don't realize is I don't wake up this full, right? I don't actually get up, and I have a personal support worker that comes a couple hours a day to my house to be able to get me out of bed, shave me, shower me, and all that. I am married, but my wife is my wife, not my caregiver. And I don't like to really cross those streams, except when we go on vacation, because two is company, three is play. And these are the things professionals with disabilities got to think. If I didn't have the disability, I'd have went to California. Why not? A great experience. I would have went to Redmond. I love everybody I've met at Redmond in Seattle. And I'm pretty sure the States would, because both companies would have had great
Absolutely.
benefits. I'm sure I would have got care, but it kind of pigeonholes me then. If I decide to move back to Canada, the program I'm on that lets me recruit, hire, train, manage my staff is a 7-year waiting list to get back on. So if I left, I'd have to give it up. Sure, my time in the States, I would figure it out. But the moment I'd want to come back to Canada, I'm at a disadvantage. So even though we've come a long way in employment equity and technology, there are these kind of fundamental things called living.
Right.
We haven't made it as easily as portable as employment and technology. So how do we get the services though? People with disabilities have choice.
Yes.
Because really, I think that's a disadvantage. I'm limited because I feel I've had a great impact at Microsoft in this year. If I was on site all the time, I can imagine that would be 10x, 20x. But we've learned to work remote hybrid,
Right.
which is cool. I love that lifestyle. But the freedom of choice is something people with disabilities still struggle
I
with
agree.
because of the personal care is usually attached to the country, the province, the city, or in the state, the country, the state, that it needs to be more portable to really have true
I
equality.
agree. I agree. Yeah,
And I think that's, in my lifetime, I would like to see that fit.
I agree.
Not for me, by then I'll be retired, hopefully, and playing shuffleboard or good. I'm already an old guy. I like going to bed early, getting up early, so there's not much of a transit. But I would love to see the next generation not be limited to geography because of the funding they need for their basic necessity skills. That's the thing we have to fix.
I agree.
That will help close that disability divide.
And we've got to fix it in a way that really makes sense for everybody. And when I say that, it's got to make sense for the employers too. So one thing, and I'll talk to you about this separately, but one thing we want to do is try to address these issues at Billion Strong, because we know 500 companies with a valuable 500, Microsoft obviously being one of the first one, have committed to including us, but we've got to solve this problem. We've got to.
We do, right? And not only through employer, and the thing is, employers need diversity and inclusion. So why aren't they investing into it before employment? Why aren't they creating school programs and bringing that in, and even helping get high school kids part-time jobs, right? Think about how we built social connection. It's through those jobs growing up as a young. Luckily, I could DJ because CDs were a thing. These hands weren't good for records. Like, yeah, I got to make a little bit of money, but in Canada, you have a disability pension. You're only allowed to make so
Yep.
much money.
Us.
So in university, I'm like, great, I got this, and then I'll work a bit. But it was the social connection that allowed me, because when you're the DJ, everybody comes to you to play their songs and music. But it's in that employment that I got to feel included, that I belong. It wasn't the whatever $30 a night I got free drinks. It was the ability to feel I have purpose and I belong here. And darn, I'm a student having a great time. Make it like the major tunes.
I bet you were good at it too.
I like to think I was. That's bias on my part.
I know that it kept you longer, but I just love what you're doing. So let's end the interview, but first, will you let people know how they can contact you, how they can learn more about what Microsoft is doing with accessibility and disability inclusion, even though a very quick search will do that. And there's so much happening, and I'm not making this about Microsoft, but I do have to give them a big nod of thanks for everything that they have done, like understanding that they're smart to hire somebody as talented as you. So
If it wasn't for them, not just giving me the job, but if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have been in a place where they could have hired.
that's
That's
amazing.
the genuine feeling that it. But Microsoft, we have an accessibility page. We have a new inclusive tech lab that we designed to build. If you get a chance, get Bryce John
Cool.
on this, and he can definitely walk you through that, or Solomon Romney, who is a phenomenal gentleman as well, to talk about the inclusive tech lab. That's really Microsoft's investment in inclusive design,
Oh,
because we like to work with people with disabilities, not about. If you want to know more about me, David Dame on LinkedIn. I use my full name, like when my wife calls me when I'm troubled, David Dame. And on Twitter, on Twitter, I'm at DDame. Feel free to reach out. Love to answer questions when I can. Wish there was somebody like me when I was growing up that I could look to for advice.
yeah.
So even though being the canary in the mine was tough, because I happened to be usually the first one like me in organizations where not just the technology, not just the physical infrastructure, but how they got to change policy. So if I travel, I got to have a support worker. How do they change all of those things? And I've always been the canary in the mine. So it's almost like, here we go, teaching you and training you all over again. I'm hoping to help others be able to maybe learn from what I've learned, and maybe learn from them. They maybe have done something differently that I didn't think of. But reach out, because it's, I think, taking the time to embrace each other as a community. If I could turn back the hands of time, I would have went back and did more of that, instead of feeling I had to distance myself from that to feel that I belonged. And
Yeah.
that was only the maturity that you come to when you get old enough to realize that you're infallible.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said. Dave, thank you. And thank you to Microsoft. God bless them. And like you said, what's happening, it's really paying dividends now. So it's very exciting. But I look forward to you coming back on the show too. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. And thank you
Thank
to the
you.
audience too.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work. To learn more about Rue Global Impact, visit rueglobal.com. And to learn more about Billion Strong, an identity and empowerment organization designed to bring the billions of voices of persons with disabilities together, you can join the global community and donate at billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org.